Hello, and welcome to Grim and Whim, unnerving tales to haunt, mystify, and spark curiosity. Let's be
Curious together.
Today we will be looking into the unsolved missing persons case of Lauren Spierer, a college student who vanished during her junior year from Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Saturday, June 3rd, 2023 marks the 10-year anniversary of her disappearance, and her family and friends are still looking for answers. Is she out there somewhere alive? Was she met with foul play? She would be 32 years old today, and by all accounts, she was headed towards a bright career with a possible... She would be 32 years old today, and by all accounts, she was headed towards a very bright future, possibly with a career in apparel merchandising. And before getting into the timeline of her case, I really want to first delve into Lauren's life and how very adored she was, and how bright and beautiful of a person that she seems to be. And I'm also going to be mainly referring to Lauren in the past tense, not because this case has been confirmed as a homicide. Her body has not been recovered. So there is, of course, a chance that she isn't deceased. However, the family and the investigative team have presumed that because of all the time that has passed, it's more than likely that she is dead. And so I will be referring to her in the past tense. But with all that being said, let's look into her personal history and a little bit more about her life. Lauren was born in Greenburgh, New York, on January 17th, 1991, to her parents Robert and Charlene Spierer. Lauren also had a sister named Rebecca, and Lauren would have made a great aunt to her nephews. While researching Lauren, I found so much about how bright and kind she was, and how she had this big personality where any room she entered, she just lit up the room. And despite the fact that she was a pretty petite girl, she was only 4'11", her personality definitely made up for her size. And she had blue eyes, long blonde hair, and a very friendly smile. And on findlauren.com, which is a website run by the Spierer family, you can see so many beautiful pictures of Lauren, from baby pictures to pictures of her going through school, and then also some pictures while she was in college. And she just seemed like such a breath of fresh air, just beaming smile, and she seemed very sweet. At the time of her disappearance, she was attending Indiana University, and she was studying apparel merchandising. The timeline of this case really begins on a night out where on June 2nd, 2011, Lauren was out drinking and partying with several friends. Her boyfriend at the time, Jesse Wolfe, did not attend the outing, and the two of them were texting throughout the night. Through the text messages that Lauren and Jesse were sending back and forth, we know that Jesse was kind of keeping tabs on her, and then eventually he did decide to go to bed. And witnesses of this outing reported that Lauren definitely appeared intoxicated, and she was also apparently on drugs. And Lauren did have a complicated history with drugs and alcohol. But the information surrounding the severity of her drug use is really not that clear. And while witnesses said that she seemed to be using drugs that night, there wasn't any clear evidence that drugs were being used. 9 months before Lauren's disappearance, she was arrested for public intoxication. And when the police searched her apartment, they did find a small amount of cocaine. That being said, her family firmly believes that she wasn't a drug addict and that, she was more of a casual user, and the drugs and the alcohol doesn't really explain her disappearance.
I think she didn't make wise choices that night, but she didn't make herself disappear.
Her family has really stressed this, that, Lauren may have used drugs and used alcohol, and she, may have enjoyed going to parties. But, she was still, going to school and doing all the things that she was supposed to do. And so there wasn't an indication that she was a heavy user, but more, did it on, a night out with friends. Typical to what a lot of, young people in their 20s who get that taste of independence when they go to university. So many of them do the same thing that Lauren does. And so I bring that up just to make it clear that, yes, there is kind of a complicated history with drug use and also with alcohol. But that doesn't explain her disappearance. And it also doesn't excuse any foul play or abduction or, whatever may have befell her. And so that is important, and I did want to make that clear before moving on. Later on in the night, we do know that the next stop on the timeline is that she was leaving her apartment sometime after midnight. They think around 12:30 a.m. And we know this because there is actually surveillance footage of her leaving her apartment. She and her friends were watching the NBA playoffs, and they were just drinking and hanging out. And at around 12:30 a.m., she and her friend David Rohn headed to a party at another friend's house. And like I said, this was around 12:30 a.m., so a little bit after midnight. And she spent the next few hours with the following people at the party. And these people are David Rohn, Jay Rosenbaum, Mike Beth, and Corey Rossman. In these hours, we do have some insight into what the 5 of them were up to right before Lauren disappeared in the early morning on June 3rd. There are several major players in this night out, and it gets a little confusing with all the names, but it seems as if Lauren was kind of moving among different parties and kind of hanging out with, a combination of these 4 guy friends. And so, maybe hanging out with, 1 or 2 at one time or just 1 at, a certain time, kind of similar to what you might do on a night out, just kind of hopping around and kind of hanging out with different people. And it seemed like a pretty casual event. At 1:46 a.m., we know that Lauren entered Kilroy's Sports Bar. Then at 2:27 a.m., she is seen leaving the bar with Corey Rossman. And Lauren must have been fairly inebriated because she did leave her cell phone and her shoes at the bar. Corey walked Lauren to her apartment complex, and this is where the story goes from a fun night out to a very precarious situation. And according to Corey's statements, when they got to the 5th floor of the apartment complex where Lauren's apartment was, they ran into 4 male students. And I guess Corey said something kind of smart or maybe sarcastic to them, and one or more of the men decked him, just knocked him out, hit him right in the face. And he said that he hit his head pretty hard, and so his memory is a little bit blurry. And that's pretty unfortunate because it definitely doesn't help Lauren's case. In my opinion, the memory loss is a bit suspicious and a little too convenient. And I do recognize that, yes, Corey was incredibly intoxicated, but I still think that it doesn't quite excuse him not knowing what happened to his friend later on in the night. To me, it just seems a little bit bizarre that you wouldn't keep tabs on somebody that you were hanging out with, but that's me. And yes, he was incredibly intoxicated, and he was also hit in the head. So at 2:51 a.m., Lauren is seen on security camera walking in an alley towards a parking lot, and her keys and purse are found along this route. And it's not really clear what she's doing or where exactly she's going, but it is possible that maybe she was trying to find help, especially since she just saw her friend getting hit in the face. And so she stumbles in the alley and apparently dropped her purse and her keys along the way. On video camera, we do see that she is stumbling through the alley, and then she is picked up sort of like fireman carry style, so like over the shoulder, by none other than Corey. So that's the one who was punched in the face. And Corey brought Lauren to his apartment where Michael Beth, who is Corey's roommate, was there waiting. And both Corey and Lauren seem to be in rough shape. And according to Michael, Corey was stumbling around the apartment. He was clearly very heavily intoxicated. He threw up on the carpet, and Michael escorted him to his bedroom so that way he could rest. Michael also tried to persuade Lauren from leaving the apartment. He said that she was insistent on heading home by herself. All right, so the timeline from here on out is a bit confusing, especially since it is mainly from statements of the people who Lauren was with that night, which is not exactly the most reliable resource. My initial thoughts are that I don't really trust their recollection. You know, can we really trust them? They could be omitting information to protect themselves, and they also had been drinking that night. And so it's kind of tricky to, trust that what they told the investigative team is what really happened. But with that being said, this is what allegedly happened after Lauren said that she wanted to go home from Michael and Corey's apartment. Michael told the police that he had called Jay Rosenbaum to look after Lauren. And apparently at some point, Lauren and Corey had been seen sitting on concrete steps, and Lauren allegedly had fallen over and hit her head pretty hard on the ground. And it's not really clear when this happened or if it actually happened, because Lauren told Jay that she did not know where she got the bruise when Jay came to, come get her from Corey's apartment. She had this bruise on her face, and she did not seem to have any idea about how it happened. So Lauren is with now Jay at his apartment, and at 4:30 a.m., Jay claims that this is when Lauren left his apartment and began walking home towards her apartment. And she was last seen walking barefoot at the intersection of 11th Street and College Avenue. She was wearing black leggings and a white t-shirt, as you can see in the surveillance footage. It was 2.5 blocks from Jay's apartment to hers, but sadly, she never made it home. Hours later, when Lauren's boyfriend, Jesse, tried texting her to see how she was from the night out, he received a reply from one of the bar employees where Lauren had left both her phone and her shoes. Jesse was obviously concerned, and he immediately reported her missing. When Lauren's sister, Rebecca, found out that her sister had been reported missing, she immediately called her father, and Robert and Charlene Spierer, her parents, began calling hospitals hoping to find their daughter there. And the next day, on June 4th, they arrive in Bloomington, Indiana, to search for their daughter and to get some information from the police as to what might have happened. I can't even imagine how absolutely terrifying it must have felt when her parents were searching for Lauren. Because yes, Lauren is technically an adult, but the Spierer family was a very tight-knit family, and it wasn't like Lauren to not respond to texts and phone calls, and it also wasn't like her to just, go off by herself. She was very much a people person. She liked to be around people, and so she wouldn't have just up and left.
Well, Janine, within 24 hours of getting that call that their daughter was missing, the Spierer family jumped on a plane and headed to Bloomington. Robert and Charlene Spierer have been staying in Bloomington, Indiana, in an apartment there for months. Now they're home, but the house still feels so empty without their little girl. When was the last time you saw her?
She came home for Mother's Day.
Charlene Spierer's voice trails off. Tears well up in her eyes.
Now that we've gone through the timeline of the case, let's discuss the investigation history and where we are today. As days passed, and then weeks, months, years, and now, unfortunately, we are into a decade since Lauren was originally reported as missing. Unfortunately, the police have only identified 10 persons of interest, and there have been no confirmed suspects. Corey Rossman is one of the persons of interest, and he willingly gave his DNA to the police immediately, right when they started the investigation. And Corey is the guy friend who walked Lauren to her apartment from the sports bar and was knocked out by those 4 male students at the apartment complex.
Accompanied by his attorney, Corey Rossman, one of the 10 persons of interest in the disappearance of Lauren Spierer, left the Bloomington Police Department after reportedly giving a DNA sample.
I just hope that they find her as soon as possible, and I'm praying for her and her family.
Do you have anything to do with her disappearance?
Absolutely not. That's all I can say.
So he has nothing to hide. That's why you came.
No, we continue to cooperate, and we'll cooperate.
On June 11th, Lauren's story is picked up by America's Most Wanted. And while it did produce about 350 tips, unfortunately, there were no breakthroughs in the case. A few days later, on June 14th, the police shared a picture of a white truck that was seen in the area at the time that Lauren went missing. And surveillance footage picked up this image of the truck. And it was a lead, but unfortunately, it didn't really lead anywhere important. The driver of the truck actually came forward and, said, "Hey, this is my truck." And he had an alibi, and he was cleared of any suspicion. On June 25th, 2011, hundreds of people in the Bloomington area participated in Find Lauren Day, and it was a huge huge search effort. And it's so clear that the community in Bloomington was touched by Lauren's life. And Lauren's family and loved ones were determined to not only make sense of the situation, but really figure out what exactly happened.
And on June 6th, her parents, Robert and Charlene, speak to the media for the first time, pleading for help in finding their daughter.
Somebody knows something. And I would just beg and plead that that person come, however they want to get us that information. I don't care if it's the website, you have a friend that can call a friend, I don't care. But somebody knows where Lauren is.
A few years later, on October 1st, 2014, the Spierer family filed a civil claim against Corey Rossman and Jay Rosenbaum. And the family did this in hopes to compel the men to disclose more information and reveal the statements that they gave to the police. And the reason why this was so important is because the statements that they gave to the police have not been shared with the public. And I'm not really sure why. I looked into why they haven't been shared. I don't know if there's some kind of protection order or something, but it is frustrating. And the judge unfortunately dismissed the case. And now in 2023, the family has still not given up hope. But they're heartbroken that they haven't found Lauren or any new details about what happened that night. And in my opinion, the people who were with Lauren that night, I believe that they know more than they're letting on. I think that they did not disclose everything to the police. And I think that somebody knows something. And in my opinion, I think it's really cowardly and dishonest not to come forward and say something and give her family and her friends and the whole community who is devastated that this young girl just went missing into seemingly thin air. It doesn't make sense, and I do think that somebody knows more than what they're letting on. The family has also made statements about Kilroy's sports bar and how they really should be held responsible for being negligent that night. I don't understand how they could allow somebody who is so visibly intoxicated just up and leave their bar without trying to interfere. There are no reports that I was able to find that suggested that the bar intervened in any way. And just a quick side note, I personally have experience working in a bar, and there's no way that a manager, a bartender, waitress, floor staff, whoever, if they see that somebody is, visibly drunk, stumbling over themselves, slurring their words, and, is having a hard time, especially if it's a woman, I can't imagine that they would just let them walk out the bar. I personally, if I saw that, I would have pulled a manager and been like, hey, they're trying to leave. Something's up. And so it's really sad that nobody thought to intervene and just let them walk out the bar. And Lauren's parents feel the same way. It doesn't make sense that nobody tried to stop her from leaving the bar. That is just a liability waiting to happen. And so this is a lesson for everyone that if you know that somebody is intoxicated, whether it's somebody that you are hanging out with or if it's just a stranger, but you can see that they're intoxicated or maybe under the influence, pay attention and check in on them, because it could be that action that saves their life. And it can be as easy as just going up and asking, hey, do you need assistance? Can I call you an Uber? Just kind of asking like, hey, are you okay? And the staff didn't have to guess that night whether or not she was or wasn't intoxicated. It was very clear that she was intoxicated. And so it is just crazy to me that nobody at this bar felt that they had a duty to care. Before discussing the theories of this case, I want to stress that these are in fact theories and that everyone is innocent until proven guilty, not guilty until proven innocent. So we can speculate, ask questions, but at this time, there are no confirmed suspects in the case, only persons of interest. But with all that being said, let's get into the persons of interest and what may have happened to Lauren that night. So the main persons of interest are Jay Rosenbaum and Corey Rossman. And Jay Rosenbaum was the last person to see Lauren alive. And the reason why these two are the main persons of interest is that they spent a good chunk of time with Lauren that night, and they're also seen on surveillance video with Lauren. And the family, the Spierer family, and the investigative team have definitely kept these two on their radar. And like I said before, Corey Rossman, he did participate in a DNA test. He gave his DNA willingly to the police, and he did cooperate, with the authorities. Jay Rosenbaum also cooperated with the authorities and took a polygraph test and passed. And Jay Rosenbaum claims that on the night of her disappearance, Lauren was using drugs, but that still has not been proven. But it is something that he stated to the police. I do think that it is important, again, to bring up that using drugs and drinking alcohol, they can be dangerous things to do, but that did not cause her to disappear. So I personally don't believe that it's very relevant to the case. And I think it's also very important not to victim blame. And even if Lauren had, been blackout drunk, it's been over 10 years and she still hasn't shown up. Her body hasn't been recovered. And so to me, I agree with the family. I just don't think it's very relevant to the case, other than the theory that some people believe, which is that maybe Lauren accidentally overdosed and the people that she was with that night hid her body and did this to avoid getting into trouble.
But 6 months after her mysterious disappearance, her parents say a wall of silence among those last seen with Lauren has yet to come down.
If we can get additional information from these boys, maybe we can simply help figure out what happened to her and move on and direct our resources in a different way.
The next theory in this case is a bit less likely in my opinion, but I did want to include it because it is a possibility. And it's that maybe she was abducted by a complete stranger. And while a random kidnapping is not likely, the police haven't ruled it out. They did have, surveillance footage of that white truck that drove by. But again, like I said earlier, the driver of the truck did come forward and he did get cleared as a suspect in the case, or even a person of interest. Lauren was a petite female and she was alone and intoxicated, which means that she was vulnerable. And it is possible that she could have been randomly picked up by a stranger. However, her parents do not believe that this was a random abduction. They don't think it was random. And I'm on kind of their line of thinking. I definitely think that somebody knows something. And I think that it's somebody who was at that apartment complex, either a friend or a neighbor or something. I personally think that there are people involved in this case that knew Lauren and were involved in her disappearance and aren't coming forward. The final theory is about Jesse Wolfe, who was Lauren's boyfriend. Now, you might be confused because, like I said at the beginning of the story, Jesse wasn't present that night. He had stayed home and was texting Lauren and then, apparently went to sleep. But some people do think that maybe he could be responsible for her disappearance in some way. He could have perhaps helped her abductors or sent the men who beat up Corey. And he initially refused to take a polygraph test, but his parents came forward and said that he did take a polygraph test that was privately administered and that he passed. I don't personally think that that is good enough evidence, but it is also important to remember that a polygraph test or a lie detector test is not admissible evidence in court. They are notoriously incorrect in their readings, and it can be a helpful tool, but it's not something that a prosecutor could use to convict someone of a crime. Charlene Spierer, Lauren's mother, will not let her daughter be forgotten. I mentioned the Find Lauren website earlier, but I wanted to bring it up again because it is a great resource on learning about the amazing person that Lauren was, as well as any updates with the case. There is even a section on the website where people share their favorite memories with Lauren, and it's really beautiful to see how loved she was by not only her friends and family, but by the community. And it really is a testament of how incredibly loved that she was. And if someone knows something, they should come forward because she deserves so much more than what she got. If you have any information regarding Lauren's disappearance, please contact policetips at bloomington.in.gov. You can also contact the Bloomington Police Department at 812-339-4477 or the Crime Stoppers of Central Indiana, and their number is 317-262 and then the word TIPS, TIPS. And I will put all of this information in the detail section of the video if you're watching, or in the podcast section if you're listening. Thank you for listening to Lauren's case, and I hope that with more exposure to our case that maybe somebody will come forward with information, whether it be someone who was directly involved in the case or someone who had witnessed something or had heard something that night.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's goodbye for now, but I hope to haunt you again soon.